Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. Welcome to Glendale City Council Budget Workshop Session, March 4th, 2025 meeting is called to order. Roll call vote, starting off with Councilmember Baldenegro.
Here.
Councilmember Conchas.
Here.
Councilmember Guzman.
Here.
Councilmember Melner, you're not on the phone. Okay. Councilmember Turner.
Here.
Vice Mayor.
Here.
And I'm present. So with that, we do have a quorum. Ms. Bauer, if you would.
Fiscal year 2025-26 budget workshop.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. We're excited today to present our proposed capital improvement plan for the FY 26-27, although it will take us to 26-2035. And with this, I'm going to hand it over to Assistant City Manager Vicky Rios to kick us off.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Today we're going to be talking about the capital improvement plan. We're going to kind of do an overview of capital planning. Whoops, this is going in and out for some reason. And then we're going to talk about the specific projects in each of the different areas. And of course, it's open for council discussion and questions today. I did want to cover this morning a revised budget calendar. When you last saw, well, let's start at the top. We had a budget workshop on January 28th talking about the 5-year forecasts. And we're here today with the capital improvement plan. And we had scheduled 2 all-day workshops for operating department budget presentations. However, at this point, staff is recommending we cut that to 1. The reason for that is that in the past, we've had pretty robust supplementals, and the departments would come and talk about all of them. This year, the number of supplementals that we're going to be recommending and bringing forward is very limited. That's due to situation with funding. We're just not going to be adding a lot to the budget. And so that's our recommendation. Of course, council can always add additional budget workshops, or if we run out of time, we can add back a workshop. But at this time, this is our recommendation, is to just do 1 of the all-day budget workshops. In addition to that, even though we did 2 in the past, some days we would end quite early. So we think that that's enough time to do it, especially, again, given the limited amount of supplementals that council's going to be seeing. And then we'll follow that up on the April 22nd. Typically what we do at that meeting is any follow-ups. So from either the capital improvement workshop or the operating budget discussions, there tend to be questions that we need to get answers to, and we take a little bit of time and come back later with those answers to council. So that's typically what we cover on the 22nd, and then we put the whole budget together with all of its pieces, including the operating budget, the CIP, the debt budget, and contingency. And then, as you're well aware, we move towards these deadlines to meet the statutory requirements to pass the budget. And those dates are listed here, starting with tentative budget. We also, again, give ourselves plenty of time so that if we have to add another workshop or something later, we have plenty of time built in there to meet those statutory deadlines. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Levi Gibson, our Budget and Finance Director.
Thank you, Ms. Rios. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Today we have our capital improvement plan workshop, as Vicki mentioned. One of the things that we'd like to do to remind the public, and to also we have some new council members, is we want to provide a little education around what is a capital improvement plan. As you know, the capital improvement plan is a 10-year roadmap for creating, maintaining, and paying for current and future capital needs. A CIP, or capital improvement plan project, is a project that costs more than $50,000 and has a useful life of more than 4 years. Examples of CIP projects that you'll see in the CIP plan this year are fire and police stations, parks, recreation centers, libraries, city buildings, water and wastewater treatment plants, streets, bridges, traffic signals, flood control such as storm drains, retention basins, and major equipment purchases. This includes fire trucks and street sweepers. This slide's new this year, but this represents the life cycle of a CIP project. And the first box there represents the study, and this initial phase involves assessing the needs and feasibility of the project, receiving preliminary cost estimates, and an evaluation of any alternatives. And the timing of this varies by project, but can be typically between 4 and 6 months. From there, we go to design, where detailed plans and specifications for the project are developed. This includes architectural and engineering designs that will guide the construction process. And I should mention, this is for a vertical construction project, as in a building. From there, construction occurs, the actual building or implementation phase where the physical work of the project takes place. This includes preparation, excavation, building structures, installing utilities, and ensuring compliance with safety and regulatory standards, and making sure that the facility meets the design specifications and project goals. And this can be anywhere up to 18 months, depending on the size of the building. At the end of the project, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, or commonly referred to as FF&E, are part of the project to equip the building with the necessary furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and to make it fully functional. Project completion. This final phase involves ensuring that the project has been completed according to plan and is functioning as intended. Official handover of the project to the city, and the project becomes fully operational. Additionally, as part of the overall planning, we also consider any ongoing operational costs to operate the facility, and will include those within the operating budget, which you will see early in April. This next life cycle is that of a horizontal construction project. That includes roads, any projects that happen in the parks, etc. And the timeline is very similar to vertical construction. However, there is no FF&E typically with these projects. Examples of these projects are park improvements and street reconstructions. Now we'd like to show you some completed examples of CIP projects that have appeared in the plan previously and have now been completed. First, here is Sunset Palms Irrigation Project, which was CIP PK 22112. It's a small irrigation project the Parks and Recreation Department was able to accomplish using ARPA funding. The funding was originally received in fiscal year 22 and was carried forward as carryover until fiscal year 24 when the project was complete. The project was completed for $456,000. This project is a great example of a relatively small project that the departments are able to complete in a short period of time. And as you can see from the picture, this made a big improvement to this park. Obviously the picture there that shows the browning grass compared to the green grass. So that's a great small project. The next example of a project is the Underground Storage Tank Replacement Project, or CIP FC 19037. This was a project to replace aging below-ground double-vaulted fuel storage tanks and the associated piping at the operations campus. The operation campus serves all the, that's where people go to fuel police vehicles, that's where they go to fuel fleet vehicles, so this is a very important project. This project was budgeted to begin in fiscal year 23, but funding was carried over into fiscal year 24 when the project began. The project is scheduled to be completed in the current fiscal year, and this project was just over $1 million to complete, and it was funded with general government obligation bonds, or GO bonds. This project represents a small, multi-phase project that was completed over 2 fiscal years. This next project is an example of a much larger project. This is the Heroes Regional Park Ball Fields. It's a project to finish the development of Heroes Park. This is a multi-phase project that spans multiple years. This phase of the project includes the addition of 3 lighted sports fields, 2 natural grass and 1 synthetic field, a dog park, mini pitch field, playground, and 8 pickleball courts, public restrooms, shade ramadas, and supporting parking. The project is funded with both ARPA and Parks DIF or Development Impact Fee funds and begin in fiscal year '23. The project is scheduled to be completed later this fiscal year, and the total project budget is $24 million. And the last project we'd like to show you is CIP WW 616. This is the West Area Reclamation Facility, which was a project to design and construct a replacement of the primary clarifier. The project started in fiscal year '21 and with completion in fiscal year '23, and the total project cost was $10.5 million. For the public and information, a water reclamation facility clarifier is also known as a sedimentation tank or settling tank. Its main function is to remove large solid particles from the water by allowing them to settle at the bottom of the tank due to gravity. And with that, I'll turn over the remainder of the presentation to Ms. Lindsay and Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Good morning, Mayor and Council. So why do we do capital planning? We do capital planning for strategic planning. The CIP provides a structured approach to planning and prioritizing major infrastructure projects such as roads, parks, public buildings, and utilities. This ensures that resources are allocated effectively and projects are aligned with council's and the community's long-term goals and needs. For fiscal management, by outlining the anticipated costs and funding sources for each project over a multi-year period, the CIP helps manage our finances more effectively. It allows for better budgeting, forecasting, and avoiding unexpected expense. Community involvement. Capital improvement plans focus on projects that enhance the quality of life of our residents. This includes improving public safety, transportation, recreational facilities, and parks. Transparency and accountability. A 10-year CIP promotes transparency by providing a clear and public plan for capital expenditures. It allows residents to see where their tax dollars are being spent. For risk management, a CIP helps identify and mitigate risks associated with aging infrastructure, such as water main breaks or deteriorating roads. Proactive investment in infrastructure maintenance and upgrades can prevent costly emergency repairs in the future. And leveraging funds. Many capital projects can be funded through various sources, including grants, bonds, and development impact fees. A CIP helps identify and leverage these funding sources to maximize investment. We also have a 10-year capital improvement plan because it is part of the City Council's financial policies. The City Council financial policy on capital asset and debt management specifies that we will address capital needs in the following order. First, improving existing assets. Second, replace existing assets as needed. And third, construct new assets. Having a long-term capital improvement plan is also considered a best practice by the Government Finance Officers Association, also known as GFOA. This next flow chart shows the process of developing the 10-year capital improvement plan. First, staff develops the 5-year financial forecast, which we presented back to council back in January. The departments then work with engineering, field operations, budget and finance, and other related departments to develop project scopes and timelines. The projects are then submitted to the budget and finance department, where we evaluate funding sources. We look at available funding, timing of projects, debt issuances, operational impacts of those capital projects, and propose a balanced capital improvement plan to the City Council, which is what you will see and we will discuss today. Any changes from today's discussion will be evaluated using the same financial models, and staff will bring those changes back to council for discussion in the workshop on April 22nd. Council then adopts the 10-year CIP as part of the budget adoption process, beginning with tentative adoption in May and final adoption in June. Again, only the first year of the CIP is appropriated as part of the upcoming year's budget. So how is the CIP funded? The CIP is funded with many different funding sources. As I mentioned on the previous slide, although council adopts a 10-year CIP, only the first year is appropriated as part of the budget. The most common funding sources are cash, which can be from fund balance or revenues, bond proceeds, which are received as revenue when we issue debt, grants, which can be state, regional, or federal grants. ARPA funding is an example of a grant we have received from the federal government, and carryover, which we will go over, in more detail on the next slide. projects that are funded, excuse me, with general obligation bonds in libraries, government facilities, parks, and flood control do require additional bond authorization to it through a special bond election. Okay, on this slide, I'll go over what carryover is. Carryover is funding that is carried over from one fiscal year to the next. Carryover occurs when a project takes more than one fiscal year. The Budget and Finance Department works with departments during budget development to estimate carryover from the current fiscal year, which is fiscal year 25, to the upcoming fiscal year, which is fiscal year 26. If a project does have carryover, the carryover funding remains in the same project and the same funding source. And carryover is adjusted after the fiscal year is closed when all prior fiscal year expenses have been recorded. Common reasons for carryover are project delays or supply chain issues, which we've experienced over the last couple of years, or projects that take multiple years.
Mayor, I have a question about carryover. Why is there no carryover column in this year's CIP book?
Mayor, members of the council, there should be a carryover column in the main portion of the report. It's just not listed in the change document. It's the first column on, if you go to page 65, it's the first column.
Okay, well, in these individual projects, and I mean, even on the cover page, it lists all the projects. I don't see any carryover amounts. So, and for an example, on the crime lab, 4 million should have been a carryover, and it's being shown, should have been a carryover for 2025, and we can get to the crime lab, what I have to say about that later. But it's being shown as an allocation in fiscal year 2026, although the 4 million was allocated to do the study and on the design and all of that for fiscal year 2025, but there is no carryover.
Mayor, members of the council, for the crime lab, for that particular project, the way the report is designed, the summary pages show carryover as a separate column. The individual project detail sheets show carryover as a specific string. So if you're looking at the crime lab project, it's the second phase. It's the second string down. It says estimated carryover, and that 4 million is listed in that line.
Okay. All right, so they're just not in the actual, they're no longer showing them in the actual project page, though.
Mayor, members of the council,
That is
in the
changed.
individual project detail sheet, it's listed as a row as estimated carryover, because that's the phase that the project or that the funding is located.
Okay, well, it's changed since last year then. how it's
Mayor,
being
members
shown.
members of the council, that's correct. It's showing as a row now instead of a column.
Okay, thank you.
So as an example, this is just a generic example for a project. If the total budget for a project is $1 million and a department estimates that they will spend $200,000 in the current year, Budget and Finance carries over $800,000 to the following year. However, after the year is closed and all invoices are paid from the prior year, Budget and Finance determines $300,000 was spent this year. We will then adjust that carryover dollar amount from $800,000 down to $700,000 so that the total project budget continues to be $1 million. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Ms. Lindsay. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Now I'd like to take a moment to review the change document. The change document is in your binders, is under each tab per project type. The change document highlights any changes to fiscal year 2026 from last year's adopted CIP to this year's proposed CIP. The first column is a project number. Next, we have project name. And then followed by the third column is a proposed 10-year project total. This column is the fiscal year 2026 amount that was adopted as part of the fiscal year 2025 10-year CIP. The next column is a new proposed fiscal year 2026 year one amount. Then we indicate if it was an increase or decrease. And then this last column is the explanation for any changes. So in this case, the groundwater wells and interconnects went up by 3.5 million. and that was due to accelerated new well projects to meet Colorado River delivery reductions and updated construction costs to reflect inflation. Next, we have new projects. The new projects are listed in this bold outline box. And then we have the totals. First is the new project totals, and then the total for all the projects. On this slide, I like to explain with the different colors you'll see on the projects in the presentation slides. These projects that are highlighted in yellow are new projects proposed by the departments. The dollar amounts in blue indicate bond voter authorization is needed for those projects. As mentioned earlier, those project types needed voted authorization are parks, library, government facilities, and drainage. Then this last arrow highlights a project that is new and needs bond voter authorization. These next three slides list the different funding sources we use to fund the capital improvement plan. First of which are development impact fees, or DIF for short. Development impact fees are one-time charges to development for new, for a new development in the city, and it can only be used for new or expanded infrastructure. Next, we have general obligation bonds, or GO bonds, are debt issuance that has to be authorized by voters. We have several programs of GO bonds like streets, public safety, parks, government facilities, open space and trails, libraries, and flood control. The debt service for general obligation bonds is paid by secondary property tax. Then we have grant-funded projects. Grants can be federal or state grant funding and often require a matched contribution. Then we have pay-as-you-go funds. These are cash-funded projects, or the cash that we have in fund balance.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that better? Yeah. 18. I think is where you mentioned that it required bond approval. I think it was more or less the phrase. So you have the arrow there, but on our paperwork, is there anything that actually indicates that these are projects we're projecting to do, but they don't have bond approval? Is that, I'm not seeing a designation.
Mayor and council, as we go through so this slide is, this is like a screen print of a future of the slides later on in the presentation. And in the presentation, you'll see the individual projects like park signage improvements. So under the park section, this project and the one below it is listed, and they're color coded. So you'll see them later on through the presentation.
And
I don't have the page number, but it's probably later, well into the slides.
So you're saying everything highlighted in blue needs to be, we need bond approval before we can actually implement that. Okay. That's the designation I was looking for, highlighted in blue. Thanks.
So next, we have our special revenue funds, such as transportation sales tax, which is our half-cent sales tax and is used to improve services for all modes of transportation. Highway user revenue funds, commonly referred to as HERF, is a restricted special revenue fund that can be used for right-of-way acquisition, construction, reconstruction, maintenance, and repair. Then we have enterprise funds like water, sewer, landfill, and solid waste. Enterprise funds are supported by revenues paid by the users of those services.
Yeah.
I have a question. So is there a way for us to know, basically kind of backing up to Councilmember Turner's question, to know, because I mean, projects that are already underway throughout the CIP, you can see carryover and you can see money programmed if we're related to where we're not going to have bond authority to go forward. So how will we know which projects are identified as being paused due to lack of bond authority? Is there a way to identify that? Because I see the zeros. I mean, I know that means zero, but how do we know which projects? Because I know obviously in parks, we can't really plan a lot with because we need to pass the bond. So how do we know which projects are being paused until then, because there's a lot of, some of them are just in here because they're not really programmed, and some of them may be programmed, but there's not funding. So how do we know the difference?
Mayor, members of the council, to my knowledge, at this point, we don't have any programs that would require bond funding that are paused. Like we wouldn't have stopped the project, let's just say, in the middle of it. The way that we do that is that we anticipate which projects are going to be bond funded, and then in many cases, we've already issued the bonds for those projects, so we know that they're able to go forward.
I said that wrong. I should have said planned. So I'm sure we had fiscal year 2026, for example, parks. We had fiscal year 2026 parks that were in our plan for fiscal year 2026, but there's zeros here right now because we're waiting for more bond authority. So I shouldn't have said pause. I should have said planned, but there's not funding. So is there a way to identify what those are?
Mayor, members of the council, the only indicator that we have is the one that Mr. Hill mentioned, and that is that they're marked in blue on the slides. And in that case, because we didn't have funding, we already moved them out. We did that action, I'm pretty sure, last year, because we knew, for example, for libraries, we didn't have the bond funding. So anything that we did have bond funding for went forward, and anything that we do not is on this CIP moved out in anticipation of potentially passing a bond later. So if you have a question about a specific project, for example, we may not know right now, but we can get back to you on specific projects. But again, in general, they've been moved and identified that they need future bond authority, and they're sitting just outside of the timeline under which they could get that bond authority.
Okay, but it would be easier to identify it because, I mean, there's, you know, there's a lot of parks. I'm just looking at parks, for example, because we know what the situation is there. There's a lot of parks listed in here. Not all of them we had planned to projects. Maybe they're in the out years or not planned. So I just was trying to understand how we know the difference, I guess.
And Mayor, members of the council, again, there's been a lot of movement, in particular in parks. In some cases, and we'll just take Heroes Park, for example, years ago, we may have planned GO bonds for that, but we were able to use the ARPA funding for it. So it got, pulled forward. Bonds have already been used, for example, for Heroes Park. So on a project by project basis, we're able to tell you its history, what it probably was recommended for funding for, what it eventually was funded with. But because this is just the 10-year CIP and it's not going sort of back historically, to trace the entire history of it would take us a little bit more time. But again, for the most part, we had a bond election, as you'll recall, where the bond initiatives did not pass. And so we had to move those projects into the future in anticipation of a possible new election. And then some other projects, and a good example of that would be Thunderbird Conservation Park. Because we had a bond authority, we moved those forward because we have open space and trails bonds. So again, on a project by project basis, we can go back and reconstruct, but for the most part, we anticipated that when and again, police, public safety and streets passed last time, so we moved some of those projects forward and had to move parks back for the same reason.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
So the previous slide explained the various sources we use to fund the CIP. And so the attached slide shows the individual projects I listed in your binder. So this shows the funding sources by the projects, and you can see on the left of the arrow, this is where we listed the carryover amount. So for this project, we have 1.2 and about 3,300 in carryover, and it lists the different funding sources. On this The little cheat sheet that we provide on the left side of your binder, that goes in hand with what you see where the arrow is pointing out. So you can see the 4050, that's under the bond section, and then 4061 for ARPA, that's listed under the grant section. So that the sheet on the left of the binders and the numbers you see on this slide, they go hand in hand, so you can identify the funding source by category. And so the next floor sides will show all the different fund numbers that make up those funding source categories. This information on these next 4 slides is that same information that's in the cheat sheet that was provided in the binder. So first you can see we have pay-as-you-go funds, and those are your general fund or 1080, and then arts. Then this has the development impact fees. So the first 4 numbers are fund number. Then the different categories, for example, fire and police, what those DIF funds can be used for. And then the last 4 is the years we implemented those DIF fees. And then we have our special revenue funds, as I mentioned earlier. As you can see, transportation sales tax, HERF. We also have GRIPSIC revenue. And this slide shows our enterprise or user funds, water, sewer, landfill, and solid waste, and then our grants. This pie chart represents the fiscal year 2025 10-year adopted CIP by project type. The total fiscal year 25 through 34 CIP was approximately $1.9 billion. As you can see on the chart, streets was the largest portion of the CIP at $443 million, or 23% of the CIP, followed by water at $365 million, or 19%, and then public safety at $277 million.
Mayor, members of the council, I just want to reiterate, this is the adopted CIP. So what we're showing you is what's in place now, and then Jonathan's going to show you next what the proposed 10-year CIP is in comparison. So this is what is currently in place, and next he's going to show you what is proposed this year for the next 10 years.
Thank you, Ms. Rios. So as she said, this pie chart represents the entire proposed 10-year CIP by project type. The total amount for fiscal year 26 through 35 is approximately $2.3 billion. And you can see water is the largest portion of the CIP at $744 million, or 31%, followed by streets at $474 million, and then public safety at $305 million. And those top 3 combine for 60% of the CIP. This is the same 10-year proposed CIP, but by funding sources. The largest funding source is our enterprise fund at $1.1 billion, or 48%, followed by bonds at $443 million, or 19%, and then special revenue funds at $402 million. The proposed amount to be appropriated as part of the fiscal year 2026 budget for the capital improvement plan for year 1 is $404 million. Of this amount, $195 million is carryover, and $209 million is new funding for projects. Streets, water, and public safety take up the majority of the fiscal year 26, totaling $207 million, or 52% of the year 1 CIP. With that, we'll go into the different sections of the CIP. First up, we have water. Water is 50% of the year 1 proposed CIP. Water funding is mostly from water user fee or enterprise fund. And then they have 1% of that is for development impact fees. Water capital improvement plan priorities are to provide water supply from multiple sources. Maintain a resilient and secure infrastructure, and to meet all federal and land and state regulations. Some of the major projects in the first 5 years for water are the rehab of water lines, booster stations and reservoirs, rehab water treatment plant, add new groundwater wells, and rehab our existing wells. Water is requesting 2 new projects this year, the Bartlett Lake Additional Space and Advanced Water Purification Facility. And if you have any questions with any of the project types, the different departments are here to facilitate those questions. And here are the funding sources for water. As you can see, the Water Enterprise Fund is a vast majority of the funding for the projects. And then the next few slides are the individual projects for the water department. And this slide represents the two new projects water is proposing. Any questions on water before we move to wastewater?
I do have one question that trying to figure out exactly what it meant. On slide 31, the bottom it says add water rights and supply infrastructure. How do you add water rights?
Looks like Ron and Sarah will answer that for you.
Good morning, Mayor.
Yeah, turn your mic on.
Is that better?
Better, yep.
Basically, what we're adding is new water supplies, which we currently don't have. So from a water resource perspective, it's adding a different source of water. So yeah, maybe we should call it something different.
I was gonna say, I didn't know there was any other rights that we could get, because I think we'd do everything we could to get any rights. All right, I just want to make sure that I wasn't missing something there.
No.
Okay.
Mayor, if I might.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Serio, correct me if I'm wrong, but would this include when a city gets rights to water because a dam is raised and they contributed in part to raising that dam, then they have a right to a certain amount of water there. But the cost of raising the dam is what we pay for that right to the water.
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, you are correct. So there's two different primary sources that we're looking at. One is advanced water purification, and the other one is more capacity in Bartlett Lake on the Salt River system. So as Councilmember Turner stated, if we participate in that project, there would be a new source of water above what the current level of the lake is that would be available to Glendale.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Next up, we have wastewater. Wastewater year one of the fiscal year 26 CIP is about 10%. Wastewater funding is mostly sewer user fee or enterprise fund, and they have 3% or 2% is for development impact fees. Wastewater capital improvement plan priorities are to maintain a resilient and secure infrastructure and to meet all federal and state regulations. Some of the major projects in the first 5 years for wastewater are rehab of sewer lines, manholes, and lift stations, the 91st Avenue water treatment plant, and their rehabilitate their west area water reclamation facility. Here are the funding sources for the wastewater projects. And as I mentioned, the enterprise fund, their sewer revenue is most of the funding for the project. And these next few slides list the individual projects for wastewater. The total CIP is about 304 million. Any questions on wastewater? Next up, we have transit. Transit funding is split between transportation sales tax at 64% and grants at 36%. Other projects include bus stop enhancement and transit bus fleet replacement. Here's their funding sources broken down by the cost for the full 10 years. And their total 10-year CIP is 11.2 million. And this slide shows all four of Transit's projects.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
How many, thank you, Mayor, how many bus stops and can we enhance for about $200 and some $1,000? Just to get an idea of the number that we're talking about, because it's pretty much, you know, 277, 224, 229.
Mayor and Council, 200,000 would do about 8 bus stops.
How many?
8 bus stops.
8? And what kind of enhancements, Mayor, if I could?
Mayor, Council, that would be adding bus shelter, bus pad, furniture, and bus stop furniture.
Okay, so we're planning on eight per year. Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Parab. Don't go too far. We got streets. Next up, we have streets. Streets is funded by many different funds. 56% of it comes from transportation sales tax, and 13 come from HERF, and those are listed under our special revenue funds. Then we have GEO bonds, DIF, grants, and general funds. Some of the projects included in this year 10-year CIP is the 67th Avenue and Greenway intersection, pavement management, and the right-of-way landscape plan. And Streets is proposing 2 new projects. And here's a list of different funding sources. As I mentioned earlier, as you can, Streets has quite a bit of different funding sources. And the total 10-year CIP is $474 million. Any specific questions on any street projects?
Yes, Mayor, if I might. Just so I understand the outline for today, we're basically going to go through the PowerPoint and ask questions on that. The book is reference material. We're not really going to go through it page by page or tab by tab even. Okay, just so now's the time then. So in looking through, I didn't notice 59th Avenue as a streets project, and I know we discussed this several months ago, and I think it had been noted that waiting 10 years to address that issue isn't really viable.
Mayor and Council, sorry, Parab will answer that for you.
Mayor and Council, so 59th Avenue between Glendale and Olive, I believe is what Councilmember Turner is referencing. The project design is planned to start in FY26, so that'll be July 1. It is not identified as a separate project because that was not originally in FY26, but we are going to start the design under the pavement management program. So you won't see an individual line for that project.
Thank
but
you.
It's still part of the PMP.
Okay. I wrote that down. It's on tape. Thank you.
Thank you, Parab. This slide shows the 2 new proposed projects for streets. Next up, we have solid waste. Solid waste is 100% funded by the user fees or enterprise fund. Solid waste CIP is focused program vehicle replacement following industry standard replacement cycle. Here's the funding source for solid waste. As I mentioned, it's the enterprise fund. This list of 7 individual solid waste projects. The total 10-year CIP is $57.7 million. Any questions on solid waste? Okay. Next up, we have public safety. Public safety is funded by many different sources. The largest is GEO bonds at 61%, followed by general funds at 23%. We have special revenue funds and development impact fees. Public safety is focused on improving existing facilities and replacing existing assets as needed. This slide shows the different funding sources for the public safety program. The total 10-year CIP is $305 million for public safety, and public safety is proposing 5 new projects. Any?
Mayor, I've got some questions about public safety.
Go ahead.
Okay, I see on slide 64, I see the crime lab is showing as a carryover for $4 million. But I did find, I guess that's why I was confused, because in my book on page 189, where it lists all of the projects, it's not listed there, $4 million carryover, not showing it all. And I'm starting to grow more and more concerned. In fiscal year 2024, the evidence lab, or evidence storage facility, and the crime lab were showing as a single item in the CIP. And I know the council believed that the crime lab was moving forward. We went out, got the bonds approved, and then last year, it wasn't showing up in the CIP at all, and the council gave I believe, a unanimous consensus to allocate $4 million for design so that we could break ground in fiscal year 2026. Now, when I look at this, and I got the dates, it was March 5th, 2024, and then April, I have the date here somewhere. Anyway, this year's CIP shows, where's my tab? $4 million, it just shows basically in the individual project as $4 million as an basically an allocation, not a carryover. Fiscal year 2027 shows zero money going towards the crime lab. And then fiscal year 2028 and fiscal year 2029 and fiscal year 2030. In last year's CIP, we were shown that the crime lab would have been completely financed and finished by fiscal year 2028. So it's being pushed out 2 years. My other question is, on the change sheet, I marked it. It shows 28,000 on the change document. It shows police crime laboratory 28 million, and it just says moved out to fiscal year 2028 pending study. But the book that you gave us doesn't show that. It shows 2030, and it also shows 32 million, not 28 million. So I'm thoroughly confused. I don't know it's my understanding that none of that $4 million that was allocated to get moving on this, because, with we can't arrest people, our police officers can't arrest people when they don't have the evidence. And this is just one instance that I just learned about recently, and this happens all the time, is that many of you know that one of my residents was killed when somebody drove into her home, killed her while she was decorating her Christmas tree. The person was, blood was sent to DPS, which is what we have to do. It took almost 4 months to get that back while this person was free, living in the neighborhood where she killed one of her neighbors. To me, that's an unacceptable amount of time to wait. And the voters have said they want this crime lab, and the council has said they want this crime lab. So why is it getting pushed out again? Can somebody explain to me what's a higher priority than getting criminals off our street?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, at the council's direction, we started conversations on the study of a crime lab early this fiscal year. That was between our principal engineer, our architect, and then Chief Brandt and his team. During those conversations, it became very clear that we had a lot of unanswered questions that we needed to answer. The primary unanswered question is, how big does this lab need to be? Is this a lab exclusively for the city of Glendale? That would be a certain size. Or are we going to have West Valley partners that want to participate in bringing evidence and having evidence processed at our lab for cost, as opposed to sending it to DPS for free? So we began at a very high level having conversations with West Valley cities about their interest in partnering in this lab, and there is a great deal of interest from most cities. There is one city in the West Valley, fairly large city, that over the last year and a half or so has decided to move in their own direction. And as an example, they want to build their own real-time crime center instead of participating in ours. And they want to bring other West Valley partners into their real-time crime center as opposed to having them be a part of our real-time crime center. It's not a bad thing, it's just different from what we thought was going to happen moving forward. And so we're walking very slowly forward with the crime lab so that we fully understand how big this facility needs to be, and so we can program it properly. The other piece to this is the crime lab will exist within property evidence, performing the functions that we can do today. So we can't do blood, we can't do serology, DNA, things like that, but we can do certain things today, and those tasks will be performed in the new property evidence facility. Once we move our team in there, we'll better understand how they function within that facility and what their needs are, and that'll help us program a future facility, which either will be an attachment to the current property evidence facility or its own building to the east. So those are all questions that we need to answer and that we are working on. We just haven't hired a company to come in and work with our team to do some of that programming. Until we get the answers for the West Valley cities and who wants to participate, we feel like spending money on programming probably wouldn't be wise. So we're just waiting to get some more, a better feel for who's going to want to participate with us in the West Valley. Then we can hire that firm to come in and help us with the programming.
Mayor, if I could, thank you, Mr. St. John. Do you anticipate these conversations to take 2 years? Because 2027 is a big fat zero for the crime lab.
No, I wouldn't think, Mayor, Vice Mayor, I wouldn't think that it would take 2 years.
Okay, because that's my concern, is it's being basically based on what was in the CIP. I have the advantage of, not everybody has last year's CIP book that's here. I do. So I went back to last year's CIP, and it was showing funding, finished in fiscal year 2028. Now we're showing funding finished in fiscal year 2023. So being pushed back 2 years, and it's something that was as critical as the council indicated to us that it was last year. I never received a memo telling me what's happening, why this is being pushed out. This is the first time I knew anything was happening is when I got this book and found out for myself that obviously something's going on with the crime lab, because nothing other than conversation's been done. So I'd appreciate more conversation with the council, because I believe it was a unanimous consensus, like, we want to get this thing out of the ground, we want to get it done. So I guess my other two questions is why is the funding being pushed back 2 more years? And does that seem reasonable? I'm not happy with that. And if the council could, let's get this thing going. I think we owe it to the residents. The crime lab was one of the big reasons people voted yes on the public safety bonds. I mean, I know all of this stuff is important, but crime lab was a really big, important thing to the residents that I spoke to about the bonds. They want us to build this crime lab.
So as I understand, I'm sorry.
Mr. Phelps.
Well, yeah, I think there's a policy question here that if we can get direction today from the council, would be very helpful. Our DNA has been in Glendale as kind of a leader in the West Valley, especially around public safety, is to do regional collaboration and regional partnerships. And so, we could just say, no, we're going to build our own crime lab. That would modify our schedule, and we could then start programming for us to be the sole user of a crime lab. We just felt, based on our past, kind of DNA, that it would make sense to engage some of the other cities. And the reason why is the type of equipment that is done for us by the state is very specific equipment, very complicated equipment. Takes, in some cases, will take a year or more just to get licensed to use it as evidence. In other words, there's a process that goes through there. So it doesn't happen where we buy a piece of DNA equipment and we can have it running the next week. There's a certification process that's really long. So we felt having regional partners to help offset the cost, which means we could get better utilization of it, cover some of the O&M upkeep, which can be substantial, made sense pursuing. But we don't have to. That is really a policy question. And if the council would, prefer us just to start really focusing on a crime lab strictly for the city of Glendale, we can come back and we could modify that schedule, and then we could program it much easier. We just felt, Vice Mayor, that it made sense to pursue. I've got a meeting Thursday with my West Valley managers, and it's one of the topics on there to bring it to up to the city manager level. But again, it's really a policy discussion, and we'll go direction however the council would like to do it. But that was really our thought, is if we could do a regional crime lab, there may be great benefit for our citizens and for the West Valley in general.
I think that's a great idea. I guess my point is, though, is that going to delay it 2 years? Because based on the CIP that you gave us this year, you're telling us that's going to take 2 more years. That's the part I'm not okay with.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, may I weigh in on that?
If I could, Mr. St. John, before I'm finished, please, is that if that all was happening, it would have been, I would think, if I was in your situation, I would have notified the council that, hey, we got your direction, we understood your direction was, let's get going on this crime lab. Here's what's happening. Here's these conversations we're having. There's a possibility that's going to delay getting this done. I don't understand how it could take 2 more years. These conversations, if it's going to take 2 more years, then I say let's not wait. But
Mayor.
I don't think there's any reason why these conversations need to take 2 more years.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, The 4 million that we're carrying over into FY26, we use 100,000 or so to hire someone to come in and help us program. We can then immediately go into design with the 3.9 that's left. 3.9 million is plenty to do the design of the crime lab. And then an so that carries us in, and I'm told design will take a year. So that potentially carries us into FY28 before we can even put a shovel in the ground. As I understand, that's why it appears as it does within the CIP for FY26. The 4 million is meant to handle programming and also design.
Okay. So I guess my last question then is why on your change sheet does it show the project is $28 million on this change sheet for public safety, and then on page, whatever the page is here, page 204, it shows the project is $32 million. Why? What's the
Mayor,
what's the difference?
members of the council, that difference is the $4 million.
Carryover.
The carryover is on one and not on the other.
28 million is new money
Okay.
added to the 4 million.
I get,
we've
yeah,
already-
I get it now, but I mean, it's like trying to play
Yeah.
hide the nut game, trying to figure out what's going on here. Thank you.
Yep. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first off, communication would have been helpful going into this. It feels to me like we're at the point today, today we're learning that we're a year away from being where we hope to be today. I don't know why this wasn't pushed faster. You know, a year ago, we said we wanted to move forward with this, and now it's just going to, you know, the West Valley City managers and all of that. So I feel, and I think maybe Councilmember Tomachoff feels like we've lost a year here from where we expected to be. In the crime lab, and I'll tell you what I see in my mind, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Even if we have participation from other West Valley cities, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have multiple DNA whatever's, or multiple blood alcohol testing equipment and multiples of this. We're probably going to have a set level of that. It's just that available time on those machines that we're not using is available then to other West Valley cities. So it becomes more of a time management issue and also a space management issue for the other employees from other cities that might be there. And that seems somewhat, it's got to be incorporated into the design question, but I think we could anticipate if we're doing it this way, if we're doing it with more. I just think we could be making more progress on this, and we could also be keeping the council in the loop a little bit better on an item that obviously from last year's discussion, we're highly interested in. Thank you.
Mayor? I have to agree with Vice Mayor Tomachoff. Before I was elected, I actually was out in the community talking to people, the residents, not just in the Yucca, but other areas, and they were really excited about this crime lab. I've had several residents ask me, where is it? Why isn't it, why haven't we heard about it? We probably, as council members, should have been told what the delay was. And I myself feel like this project should be started. The public voted for it. They approved it, and it shouldn't be delayed. I think it's a great idea for the other cities to be able to come in on the project, but if that's what we're waiting for, I'm not in agreement with that. I think it should go forward.
Mayor?
What?
I'd also like to express that same sentiment of this council and the city in terms of supporting public safety. When it comes to the election for the bonds, there was no stipulation in the information pamphlet that the other cities had to buy in and sign a MOU in order for the project to start. So I just want to make sure that we're being very transparent with the voters and that we get this project rolling as soon as possible. Thank you.
Mayor, if I could, just to wrap it up, Mayor, I believe it's clear should be clear now that let's go. let's get this going. You know, I mean, we can't be like, well, get back to us next year and let us know if you want to participate. Like, yes or no. I mean, as Councilmember Turner said, you know, we're going to need the equipment regardless of how many people are using it. Like, let's start going. And that, you know, I mean, I would think of something like this is going to be basically, probably most likely, a 24 operation. The police department's a 24-hour operation. Other cities could schedule time, flex time, however you want to call it, when they can use the lab when we're not using it. I mean, I don't know how much bigger we need to make it, maybe a little bit bigger. But I mean, this is the third year in a row, because 2 years ago, we all thought this was happening because there was money in here for the evidence storage, and it was shown as one project, which confused all of us. And then when we realized, oh, that was just for the evidence storage, which I'm glad we're doing, but it's just, like I said, I mean, I honestly do think it's kind of like a hide the nut game. And the lack of communication, you know, clearly this is an important thing for the council. It was for the previous council. It is for this council. So I just would like some acknowledgement that we want to get this done. Thank you.
Mayor, would this be my my time to talk about Fire Station 154 relocation?
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, as we go through any of these, we encourage you to ask questions. This is the time for that, yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. So Fire Station 154 relocation, I've been briefed and talked about this with different stakeholders even before my swearing in. So I just wanted to bring this up for the public and also for the Cactus District residents to start getting involved in the conversation. So Mr. St. John, can you tell us what is the timeline for this project and how will it improve response times for residents?
Mayor, Councilmember Conchas, it's a good conversation to have publicly because it involves our relationship with the City of Phoenix and the automatic gate system. So as you know, our current station sits at about 43rd Drive in Peoria, and it makes a lot of right turns into the City of Phoenix. We service a lot of Phoenix residents out of that station, which is fine. I mean, the residents deserve service, but there's a better model for us. And now that Phoenix is changing that service area, so the Metro Center area is changing dramatically. They're bringing a lot of new people into that area. They're coming forward with a plan to the Automatic Aid Council, if you will, Central Arizona Life Safety Council, to talk about how they plan to service that area. So our move of Station 154 needs to be in lockstep, if you will, with when Phoenix is ready to build their station and put an all hazards unit in that area. So those are conversations that we've been having for a number of years now with Chief Freeberg and the Phoenix Fire Chief, Mike Durant. And it has gone up to the assistant and deputy city manager level and city manager level. So everyone is aware of what we're doing to better serve our residents, to improve our response times along our spine, which is 59th Avenue, and Phoenix's need to service their area differently because they've changed how what that service area looks like.
Thank you. And Mayor, just my final question is, when will the community be able to give input on this, or is this the time?
Mayor, Councilmember Conchas, anyone in the community that has questions about this is free to make phone calls, to ask questions. I don't anticipate that we'll have a public meeting until we purchase land, and then we'll notice the community where that land is purchased, where we plan to build that fire station, and engage them in conversations about what that will look like for them in their individual households.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I'm a member of the community and I have questions. I'm going to ask them now. When Phoenix introduced what I think is an absolutely terrific idea for the makeover of Metro Center, I noticed that there didn't seem to be a fire station, a new fire station located in an area to serve that. So that I've been concerned about that. Are they still in that mode, or have they given more thought to where they're going to locate their next fire station that will help handle that?
I'm going to ask Mayor, Councilmember Turner, I'm going to ask Chief Freeberg. He's had more conversation with Mike Duran than I have, so
okay,
allow him
thank
to
you.
answer that.
Thanks, Rick. Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Turner, the conversations at the CalSAC, if you will, have centered around the Cactus Precinct for their police department, they have now bought land at 39th Avenue and Thunderbird and Old Fry's Electronic. So within their 5-year, 10-year CIP, they have a sequencing as well. So conceptually, myself and Chief Duran, those are his two primary locations he has in his planning documents to build Phoenix fire stations.
So that's 39th and Thunderbird would be the closest?
Or 39th and Cactus.
39th and Cactus. So he has two on 39th Avenue, is that one at Thunderbird? Okay.
I would leave that to the city of Phoenix and their CIP programming and what he brings forward for his conceptuals and what they're going to decide on final placement.
So they have two potential locations and they'll choose one or the other? Is that what you're thinking?
That's what they have articulated to us so far.
Okay. So best case scenario for us would be that it's at Cactus, which, just means it's 2 miles closer. One.
The Phoenix location?
Yeah, for them to locate, to help relieve the demand on us to protect even more in the Metro Center area.
Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Turner, that's usually the methodology is to try to sandwich those high density areas, yes.
Yeah, okay. And I'm a big believer and supporter of the automatic aid system. And, people may wonder, well, why did Glendale locate a fire station so close to our city boundary? And it's so that Phoenix wouldn't also have to locate one very closely. We'd have one station that could go both directions there in the automatic aid system. And Phoenix also located a station, I believe, down and around 43rd and Camelback, which would be from their point of view, close to their boundary, that runs into Glendale quite a bit. But they're changing the picture over there, and I think we need to understand that, which I think we do. I don't know that the solution for us is necessarily for us to move our station farther away unless they know that, they need to know ahead of time that maybe is what we're considering so that maybe they're going to decide that Cactus isn't close enough for them. And I don't want to get into a turf war and undermine automatic aid. But it seems like we have a problem here. It may have, I know that there's been discussions among council members in both cities about this, and I imagine the manager level too. We need to get a handle on this, and because it has a domino effect on all of our other stations and the protection for the rest of our community. And if they stay at Cactus and we move farther away from there, then that's going to be problematic for their new development, I think, and they need to know that ahead of time if we're thinking about moving farther away. I also see in the CIP that we have a station, I think last year it was described as a placeholder at 75th and Orangewood. I'm not aware of any land that we own in that area that we plan on building on, but just as a general something in that area. Is that potentially the relocation of 154 to that area?
Mayor, members of council, Member Turner, I would offer, based on the policy discussions and decisions today, we would go into that deeper dive analysis. We would look at our response times, our incident-centric response times, look at the data to bring forward that programming document. We've been focused on the last year based on the council direction from last year around that 99th Avenue and Glendale conversation we had last year. That's where our focus has been. We've had ongoing conversations about our 154 Phoenix relationship intentionally and collaboratively with the city of Phoenix. The one we talked about, that 75th and Orangewood, has not been on the priority right now because our focus has been driven by the policy discussions last year.
So at this point, it really is a placeholder and a second or third tier option for us. It's not something we're sharpening our pencils over today. So thank you. The other element of this is several years ago, and the mayor certainly saw this potential, as did others, to bring in an engine company from Phoenix and co-station them with our engine at 154, or it didn't have to be an engine in our book, but it could be an LA or whatever. And we did that for a while, and we made a big deal out of it, press out there and photos and all of that. And then it went away. The Phoenix one went away, I think. And that's where it was last year. So if that's a solution, if that's an element to part of this, then if Phoenix is going to do it, they've got to be committed to it. And this is not something that will just stand up for a few months for the photo op and then walk away from.
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, your You are correct, and that the service from MR70, which is a medical response unit, 4-person medical response unit, changed last year or over the last couple of years because of staffing issues in the city of Phoenix. But Chief Freeberg, when he first came here, engaged in conversations with Chief Duran, and we now have more of a guarantee that will be staffed 7 days a week for, I believe it's 10 hours a day, 7 days a week.
That's excellent.
During the high demand time, which makes
Correct.
sense. And it's also, if we think about, modern fire department, modern medical components of that, all of this new construction over there at Metro Center is all going to be under the latest building codes with the most fire resistant materials and everything else. It's not really the fire component that is likely to be the biggest call volume for us. I would predict it's going to be more likely on the medical side of things and all of that, and that's what we need to be prepared for. Of course, we do need to be prepared for fire. With density, it has it has additional risks that you wouldn't normally have. But, that's the component I'm looking at. And if Phoenix is willing to commit to an MRU in there and show us long-term funding for it, and we have a MOU on it, then that helps the picture. And then maybe we're looking at a remodel of 154 rather than a relocation. And maybe this is all the shell game that cities and city managers and fire chiefs have already been playing. But I'm just saying, our community needs to know, where's the nut? Where's that peanut under the shell that and when's it going to show up for us? Thank you.
Mayor, Mr. St. John or possibly Mr. Freeberg, so Phoenix passed their bonds in November of 2023, and I know there were numerous conversations with Vice Mayor O'Brien that there was nothing in their next 5-year CIP programmed to address this issue. They would take another bond approval in 2028 to get that done. So that's why I'm a little confused about the amount of money we have programmed for Fire Station 154, almost $5 million in fiscal year 26 and $7.5 million in 2027, when Phoenix doesn't have any funding to operate with to actually make any of these changes that I know they're talking about making, but they're not in this first, 1 through 5 CIP in Phoenix. That I know for sure. So the funding that we have programmed here doesn't really line up with that unless we're intending to do something sooner than Phoenix can do something.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, that is the nuance. They had the Cactus Precinct, that plan was in their 5-year CIP a couple of years ago, and after they passed the bond, they moved it out. I don't know why they moved it out. I don't know that Chief Duran knows why they moved it out. He probably does, but that's not the conversation that we're having. The conversation that we're having is how do we better serve our residents? How do we improve our response times? And looking at the study that was done, the service area study that was done a year and a half ago now or whatever it was, that study suggests that moving the station a mile west provides an additional benefit to our community. Moving it even further west provides additional benefit. So the chief and I have been looking at property from 59th Avenue and Cactus area all the way to, say, 51st and Olive area, and everything kind of in between, and what's available, what might work, what would provide the best service for our community while not abandoning a service area in the city of Phoenix, making sure that they were prepared for us to make that move. And so that is the nuance that we're working through for sure.
So just to make sure I understand that, we are basically moving in the direction of moving ahead before they have any funding to do, that they had their next round of funding to address it.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, what I would like to do, if the council approves, and it is a policy decision, is to go out and secure the land. And then we can sequence the building of that station and the move of our all hazards unit from 54 to the new station 54. And Phoenix, to your point, they have the option of using our old fire station if that's what they need to do, and putting their own all hazards unit, 24-hour all hazards unit in there. There's been a lot of conversation about possibilities. And so I don't know where Phoenix is going to land, but I think we need to go out and find the land and make sure that we're doing what we can for our community.
And I agree with that. I guess, so is there no possibility that Station 154 couldn't be expanded where it is? And we wouldn't have to buy land? And if we had a stronger commitment, I know I've had discussions with Vice Mayor, sorry, I can't see out of my glasses, I need to clean them. With Vice Mayor O'Brien about this, and I know that you know, when we've had some pretty frank discussions about the fact that, you know, do we need to do an IGA? Well, we need a commitment from Phoenix to be committed to staffing, additional staffing for 154 as it stands right now, and I'm pleased to hear that I don't know whether we have anything in writing. I think that might have been the problem last time. And I know during COVID, everybody had staffing issues. You know, I mean, I think that's when they started to just not be able to send a unit over there. And then after a while, when you're just not doing it anymore, then you just don't do it anymore. So I'm glad to see that there's an agreement of some sort in place to do that. But is the idea of that being a joint station, is that even on the table?
Mr. Phelps?
Yeah, Mayor, members of council, Vice Mayor. I mean, I think that the location, when you're using an automatic aid system, which uses AVL to talk about the closest asset into an area, the minute we commit to putting it and maintaining it at that location, it will always be likely to go to the, you know, into the city of Phoenix more potentially than here. We have an issue with call volume that it not only affects 154, but then it's affecting our other stations, because as we're into Phoenix, we then, the workload and the call load gets picked up by other stations. And we've had good discussions about this. As you know, we're really committed with our new fire station design to really design it with kind of now the understanding of how we do decontamination, how we store turnout gear differently, how we make sure living quarters are separate. You know, it really, yes, can you remodel an existing station? You could, but you know, our new 153, when we get a chance to cut the ribbon on it, is going to be a great model, and we've designed it such that it could be replicated in the city, in our service area. So at the end of the day, just as a reminder, I haven't seen numbers in the last year, maybe you want to correct me on this, but the last time I looked, we were still going into Phoenix roughly about 1,800 service calls a year. Am I real far off on that?
What's
Okay.
the net?
Now,
What's the net, though? That's the net?
1,800 calls out of a total of what, about 2,500 calls, 2,700 calls?
City Manager Phelps, we're still a net giver, but we've leveled out over the last couple of years with some service changes. But 154, 60% of their 4,000 calls is in the city of Phoenix as part of the automatic aid agreement.
So I think a lot of it is on location. It just, we you know, if we can go more westerly, it'll impact not only 154, but it'll have a benefit of our other stations that are along that spine. We will still be servicing into Phoenix. We'll still be a good partner in automatic aid. And I would just close with this, is there isn't a city in the entire automatic aid system that has the numbers of units out into a community versus the call volume coming in. We've been a good partner. We want to continue to be a good partner, but strategically for our operations, it would make sense, from our opinion, to look at another location a little bit slightly more westerly and build a brand new station, from the scratch.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phelps. So 153, that's considered I mean, I know it's on the same site, it's just as a brand new fire station, so I don't know whether you consider that a remodel. What is that considered?
Mayor, members of council, Vice Mayor, we literally tore down that entire station. We had a little bit more land to work with there. We were able to operate from temporary quarters, but it's not ideal, to do it in that way. If you could have just a clean piece of land to work with, we think you could really optimally design it and not affect the operations and put the impact on the firefighters.
Okay, thank you. And I'm personally okay. So the $5 million in fiscal year 2026 is to possibly purchase land. And then then hopefully the land doesn't cost that much, but there's more money in there to actually start working on. Even though you have a footprint, you still have to figure out how it's, there still has to be some design work there. So I'm okay with that as long as there's good communication to the council on exactly where this land is, all of that before any of that even happens. I don't want another surprise. So I'm okay with moving forward with it as long as we get memos and that we're informed on what's happening. I don't like finding things out when I get the budget book and find out, oh, this whole thing's been going on this whole time when no one's told us. Thank you.
Mayor.
Go ahead.
Also, in the spirit of transparency, I would like to work with the city manager's office to see if we can get some community input or at least some information out to the community, because I know as the Cactus District council member, if the fire station starts getting demolished, I will get calls asking why is my fire station being demolished and why have you as a council member not done your due diligence to inform the community. So if we could work together in order to provide that information to the residents and to get them involved and to have them feel a sense of ownership and pride with this project, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Mayor, if we're moving on, I did have a question about the Western Area Fire Station. So,
Before we leave 154, I just want to make
there's more 154? Okay.
just a little. I'm concerned about the relocation of 154 farther west. I think it undermines the automatic aid agreement. I think that this is more of a situation that can be worked out. I think it could be worked out, and maybe it needs to be worked out at the council level. You've repeatedly said this is a policy issue, so that means it's a Glendale City Council and a Phoenix City Council policy issue, and that maybe we should be looking at what are we, incorporating it at that level, because when we talk about moving 154 west, that just moves it closer to 157 and, all of our other stations. It is in a location where it fills, at least geographically, it certainly fills a void. Now, we are rolling into Phoenix more. I don't know if they're, Station 25 down there off of Camelback, whatever number that is, how much they're rolling into Glendale. Different kinds of hazards with the industrial and that sort of thing, probably. But I'm just concerned that, because we're rolling in under automatic aid more often into Phoenix, then now we're going to lay on our taxpayers a huge expense to move us, to relocate a station and all of that. Those aren't cheap, when in fact there may be a solution available that just isn't getting worked on because we're not at the right level yet. Okay? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So the Western Area Fire Station, I saw it in here somewhere. Where are we with that? Is the study finished? And I see the first money programmed is $2 million in fiscal year 2029.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, what we are talking about internally with economic development services, how much of the 303 annexation area are we confident that we know what it's going to look like long term, and what percentage of the land out there or possible annexations are still we're unaware of. We're not really sure what's going to happen, because that's going to determine where that station needs to be. Now, obviously, with the building of rooftops in Zanjero, the building of rooftops in Allen Ranch, along Camelback and Cotton Lane area, we're seeing the need to increase our pace on figuring that out. As I understand it, we're about 90% sure of what that area is going to look like. There's only a 10% variable right now. And so we do believe that location at Saraville and Northern, where we own property, is a good location. We don't know that it's the best location. There's more work that needs to be done on that.
So I guess, I thought the Western Area was the fire station in the sports entertainment area or the airport vicinity or somewhere there. Are we talking about two fire stations now, one there and one out in at Saraville?
So Mayor, Vice Mayor, if you look on the form, Fire Station 1511 is Western Area, and Fire Station 1510 is Airport Area or Westgate Area. So for Fire Station 1510, we have finished programming.
Okay, so you have finished this, the study is finished for that?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, yes.
So has a location been identified for that?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, yes. It's across the street to the north of the airport. Is what we're seeing. We have a couple of options, but what we're seeing as the ideal option is across the street from the airport on the north side of Glendale.
And we own that property?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, that is correct, yes.
Okay, so is that going to be presented to the council at some time coming up?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, yes.
Okay,
I have a question.
all
on
right,
that.
thank you.
I have a question on that, Mayor. So on page 64, it shows Fire Station 1510 Airport Area. That's the one that you're talking about. The $3 million, what is that for in fiscal 27? And then the carryover of $537,500, what is that for?
Mayor, Councilmember Guzman, the $3 million would be for design and then moving into construction when we're ready to move into construction. The issue that we have with 1510 is there's a general fund implication because we'll need to hire the staff to manage that fire station. So we need to either write for a SAFER grant to try to get the grant to pay for those bodies while our general fund becomes more healthy with the revenues that we're anticipating from developments that are occurring right now, or we need to wait until our general fund can sustain that additional personnel.
So if that's going to take some time, then we're not going to, what's the anticipation date or that this would be completed? The fire station?
I'd have, Mayor, Councilmember Guzman, I'd have to see it on the, can we flip to the page that has that on it?
It's on 64.
Okay, I see it now. Sorry about that. Fall of, Mayor, Councilmember Guzman, probably fall of 29 would be my best guess.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, I had one more question. You had mentioned to Vice Mayor Tomachov that we're looking at 2 fire stations. This is one and then another one closer in Westgate?
Mayor, Councilmember Guzman, no. 1510 would be the airport area. 1511 would be more all around the 303.
Oh, the 303. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rick St. John and Chief Freeberg. This slide shows 3 of the 5 new projects that public safety is proposing. Do we have any additional questions for public safety?
I do have one. What is the Fire Resource Center replacement project number 26005? It's on the change document on the top line of the box. I just don't know what that is.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, if I may. We
Oh,
currently
you're
have
back.
we currently have a fire resource facility at 55th and Orangewood that's absolutely falling apart. We need to replace that facility, and this is a placeholder to replace that facility at the operations campus, more than likely.
Okay.
Mayor?
But
Mr. St. John, I see the police department radio replacement. One of my priorities for the Cactus District and for City of Glendale is speed enforcement. So in the future, would this be the opportunity to request speed radar guns for our police cars?
Mayor, Councilmember Conchas, I don't believe radar guns would be part of a capital plan. I think that would be part of the general fund.
Thank you.
It can be part of that discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick St. John. This slide shows the two of the other 5 new public safety projects. And I mentioned earlier, the 10-year CIP for public safety is $305 million. Any questions before I move to parks?
Mayor, I have a question. On the Gripstick HVAC renewal, is that they need a new system out there? Or that's planned for fiscal year 26 and 27?
Mayor and Council, Michelle Wanteko will answer that for you.
Okay.
Mayor, members of the council, that is for the renewal of that system. So there's cooling towers out there. That's the evaluation, design, and replacement or refurbishment of those systems.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Next, we have Parks. Parks is funded by many different sources. Their largest is GeoBonds for both parks and open space trails, totaling 95%. Then we have general fund at 4% and development impact fees at 4%. Some of the projects proposed include improvements at Bonsall Park North, Grand Canal Linear Park, Dunbird Conservation Park, and Dunbird Paseo Park. Parks is proposing 2 new projects totaling $1.4 million. This is the Parks CIP program by funding source, and as you can see in fiscal year 27, 28, and 29 under line 4050, which is GeoBond Parks, that's when they'll need additional voter authorization for those projects. These next slides show the individual projects for parks they're proposing for the 10-year CIP. Any questions on any additional specific projects?
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. So I know we're going to be, well, we've started the process anyway to move forward with bond funding for parks. And so how do we, I guess what I was trying to understand earlier is how do we identify, you know, I mean, obviously we can talk about all the way out to 31, 35, but fiscal year 26 through 30, because obviously there's a lot of zeros in here, but which parks are we going to which projects are we going to basically be including in this next, I think we're going to go out for 40 or $50 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. There's a lot more needed than that. I mean, that would only just cover the Heroes Park Aquatic Center, and I see that's in the out years. Obviously, because you can't just do that or the bonds won't pass, because we need more than people just in the Yucca district to vote for that. So, but how are we going to identify, or how do we, I guess what I'm trying to understand is how do we prioritize which projects are in, is that what these blue boxes tell us? Is that those are in the the next 5-year CIP that we want to get these projects programmed into, if we're fortunate enough to have the bonds passed, to get these projects programmed into that?
Mayor, members of the council, that's essentially correct. The numbers identified here in the blue boxes are projects that we currently don't have a funding source for, so they would be part of what we'd be able to do if we have a Parks and Recreation bond that we're successful in passing. So the dollar amount, the process again, and I don't want to get too far into it because we're going to come back to you with that, and it's not technically what we have agendized, but we do have a consultant as council. You know, we talked to council about hiring someone to do some surveying for us. That's taking place actually next week. And so we've taken what is currently in this CIP for parks, libraries, flood control, and general government facilities. I knew there was a fourth one. And put together those dollar amounts and gone out, you know, he'll be going out to the community to see what is the appetite for passing bonds in those categories, and then we'll bring those results back to council. But they do include all of the dollar amounts for these projects that are in blue, because these are the projects that would need bond funding to get completed.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rios. All right, so well, I guess that's a discussion for another day. I did have a discussion, and I've talked to Mr. Phelps about this, I mean, we've got, I don't know, is it 79 parks in the city? Somewhere around that. We've got a lot of parks, and a lot of them are small parks that are not listed in our CIP. And so I'd like to have a conversation about how are we going to address capital needs, irrigation, and I mean, our plan is to address, there's a lot of needs in some of our smaller neighborhood parks, but they're not listed in here anywhere. So how do we put something in here, whether it's for, you know, just category of small neighborhood parks? But if, I mean, how do we make sure that even these small neighborhood parks get the attention that they deserve when they're not listed in the CIP? I'm not exactly sure how we do that, but I think it's a conversation we should have.
So I think John Kennedy, our Parks Director, is able to answer that question, but I will say before he does that over the past several years, we have used ARPA funds to address a lot of things in neighborhood parks. We've been putting in new irrigation. I think Levi showed an example of that on a slide earlier. We have been doing lighting projects, both as part of that and part of the performance-based contracting. And we've also been putting in new playgrounds. So new playgrounds, new irrigation, new surfaces, and new lighting have been done all around the city in a lot of parks, and we can certainly get you more information on all of the parks. But we were able to use quite a bit of ARPA money to accomplish that. And so these are some of the projects that are remaining that still need some of those types of improvements. But I'll let Mr. Kennedy answer more completely.
Thank you, Ms. Rios. Mayor and Vice Mayor, yes, that's a very good question. Obviously, the CIP plan is a 10-year snapshot, and due to the number of parks that we do have, they're not all included within the 10-year plan. However, staff does. It's a dynamic document that we review continually, and there are plans that we do keep track of the needs and forecasting of replacement and repairs for various parks that may not be within the 10-year plan. Just because they don't show up there doesn't mean they're not being tracked and being reviewed. So as we review each year, we update the CIP plan, but we include other parks that may not have been in the CIP the prior year, if that answers your question.
Somewhat, but how are those so what I'm not sure what the answer is, but whether you have a category that captures all the rest of the parks, and then every year projects for those parks, whether you, I think, spread them out around the city, are presented to us and say, yes, that's what we want to. I mean, I know they basically all qualify for capital projects. There's nothing you're doing that's less than $50,000 probably. I mean, you can't do a whole lot for $50,000. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but I feel like there needs to be a little more transparency for the residents, because I have people ask me about, they'll call me up about a park, and then I look and it's not in here, so I don't know the answer. But how do we get the answer in here? Whether it's an addendum to the budget every year where we say we've got, depending on what our budget is, we've got $5 million in money to address. We're going to do however many parks we're going to do. We're going to do, two from each, whatever we do, but document it somehow where it's so that we can figure out how we want to prioritize, because we're in the neighborhoods with our neighbors. We hear what the concerns are. I drive around and look at my parks at least a couple of times a month, make notes, and pay attention to what's going on in the parks in my district. I'm sure everybody else does that too. So involving us in that process is probably a good idea, but how do we get it into the CIP? Because I think even if it's a single item with a sub list of like, these are the parks we're going to do, like special events, there's a money for special events, and then there's other special events under that. I don't know if you have an idea of how we can accomplish that.
Mayor, if I may, Mayor, members of the council, if you have specific projects and specific parks that you've made note of that need some type of refurbishment, that this would be the process for you to add a park to that. That's what this workshop in particular is about. And so if you don't have them at this very moment, you can certainly, send us something and let us know. These are the parks and the recommendations from your Parks and Recreation staff based on their experience. But if you have a specific park that you either have a question about when it was last refurbished or when it is due to be refurbished, or you have identify a need in one of your parks for some capital investment, we would, take that information from you, bring it here, and then prioritize it amongst all the other projects. This is ultimately your CIP. So that's the kind of input, especially that we sort of look for today. If you have other projects that you'd like to see, our answer generally is, let us know. We'll go back, we'll look at our funding sources, we'll look at priorities, and we'll make a recommendation as to when or where we can add that park, if it is in fact capital. Now, there are other types of park maintenance that Parks is doing that probably, you know, that may need to be done, and the answer may be, well, that's actually a maintenance, even though it may be costly, and we're going to be doing that at some other time. But those are the kinds of things that we need to hear from you. If in fact you have a park that needs some additional attention, let us know, and then we'll take a look at it and put it in line with the other parks and help the council determine what those priorities should be.
I guess I didn't, thank you for that. I guess I didn't make clear what I'm trying to say is that I think that and Mr. Kennedy did say that there's stuff that happens, projects that the park takes on that are not listed in the CIP. So what I'm asking for is a process to be established. Give us a budget of the amount of money that's going to be allocated for these small projects so that we know, and then let us, between the 7 of us, work out how we want to allocate that money, rather than just having, because I mean, even if you say, well, I want to bring a project and somebody, we don't have any frame of reference of what the budget for that even is overall for these small little, you know, there's a lot of really small little parks, especially in the older part of the city, that are really, really small, that need, you know, quite a bit of attention. So what I'm trying to do is figure out if there's a way for us to have a process to address that, rather than just say, well, let us know what you want, what the issue is with the park, and then, you know, you have everybody giving us an issue with an individual park when we don't really even know what the budget is for those small ticket items. I guess compared to the big picture, they're small ticket items for some of the smaller parks around the city. How much money are we going to allocate towards that in this next fiscal year? I don't know the answer to that either.
Mr. Phelps?
Yeah, Mayor, members of council, Vice Mayor. So, I mean, there's a couple different things. Again, it's that, if you recall, the council a number of years ago, we were having some issues with just even basic keeping up with painting. And so we allocated in our operating budget, we increased the parks funding to have more maintenance people. I think it was last year or the year before, we added on irrigation specialists. And so when you saw one of the slides in the earlier presentation where we showed, I believe that was Bonzel, where we showed a before and after picture, that, you know, that was part of the work of the irrigation team being able to come in and replace and update irrigation. Some of those may be on a large enough scale to be considered a capital project. Some may be part of the operating budget. So there's also another opportunity within, when we adopt your operating budget, that we can increase the amount of staff and maintenance that will give the same impact of improving those parks, but it doesn't technically become a capital project where where it meets kind of the general definitions of capital. So there's really is more than one way to do it, but those were some recent examples of where in the operating budget, you provided additional resources to the parks team, and we've been able to see some of the benefit of doing that.
Thank you for that. So, but irrigation, I mean, even in the beginning of the presentation, we were shown irrigation's considered capital. And we, you know, I mean, I don't know that every park in the city's programmed for eventually getting, you know, irrigation replaced. And that's generally, I mean, we have old equipment, we've got other issues with the parks, but the biggest issue is, in most of our parks, is irrigation. I mean, we can't get water on the grass, we can't get water on the plants, and the parks just don't look nice because they don't look inviting because there's problems with the irrigation, but we don't have, when our phone rings, if I could say, oh, you know, if somebody asks me about this park and I say, oh, there's programming in here to address the irrigation in fiscal year 2027, it's on our radar, we're going to take care of it. But we don't know that because they're not all listed in the CIP. So even though, and you know, your presentation did tell us that irrigation is capital. So I'm just trying to figure out an easier way for us to understand how the money's being allocated, how it's being prioritized, how the parks are it's being spread out evenly around the city, that everybody's getting their fair share of investment in irrigation in their neighborhood parks. rather than just we do the big stuff in the CIP and then on all the other stuff is just kind of, I guess, the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of policy.
Mayor, members of council, Vice Mayor, irrigation can be a maintenance issue and irrigation can be a capital project. It really depends on the scope. If it's just a matter of going in and replacing, sometimes it's making repairs or adding different control units in, we wouldn't call that a capital project. We can do that under maintenance. And then you're absolutely correct. If we went in and say, let's just tear out all of the below ground infrastructure, put in all new control heads, all new system, that would likely rise to being a capital project. So that's what I'm saying. I think there's more than one way of doing it, but you can do it through a operating budget on the smaller scale, and then the larger scale projects, the CIP is really the best mechanism to do that.
Okay. One last question. Is there a list somewhere of the parks that aren't in the CIP and plans for investments in those parks? Is there a list somewhere of that?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, so, as I mentioned before, with the CIP plan being a 10-year document, part of the reason why you don't see all of the projects within that 10 years because there's a realistic of what we can actually get done on a per year basis. So some of those, since we have so many, they don't always fit into that 10-year plan, so that's why they're not all within the 10-year CIP plan. But it is something that we continually go through and evaluate each year as we look at the CIP plan. So we do know, we do have a listing of all the parks. We do know our asset management. We go through 4 steps each year to review data collection, compile usage data that we might have, condition reports of our assets, different community feedback, whether it's from city officials, from our staff, from Glendale Ones, from other citizens, is the second step of that collaboration process, and then we draft and review the CIP. So that's kind of the ongoing step process that we go through. So we can provide more information besides what's in the 10-year CIP, again, but the 10-year CIP is really what we can realistically expect to get done within each particular year of the plan.
Okay, so I actually have 10 years worth of CIPs because I've been here a while, and I have gone through, because I'm a nerd, and I have gone back through some of the old CIPs looking for, and I don't remember off the top of my head, some small parks that have never in 10 years been in the CIP. And I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out is how do we address that? And if there's a list that you said tells me what I'd like to know about where that is being carried somewhere in a an attention and it's going to need money budgeted to it. That's what I would like to see, because like I said, there are some small parks that have, in the 10 years I've been here, they've never shown up in the CIP. So that's my concern, is how are we addressing some of those needs, because we've got so many parks and some of them are quite small. That's just, I wanted to understand if there's a better way to manage that.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is, I think, my 10th budget cycle, and this is the first time it's now, just a few minutes ago, was clicked with me that staff expects us to come to this meeting with our CIP goals for our parks, individual parks and all of that, and I guess throw them out on the table and hash it out Game of Thrones style. I don't think that's the best way to do this. I think that, we could have a reminder, a few months ago saying, and then actually I believe it belongs, we could do more work with our 5-year forecast workshop that's occurred to me today, and this would be something else, is like a reminder that, if we have desires for our parks, for instance, or for streets, or for whatever, that are capital, that meet the capital criteria, that we should be putting those out ahead of time so the department heads can review those and see whether or not there's something that they themselves would recommend go into the CIP. And if so, then that gets incorporated. I've asked year after year, why doesn't anybody come to the council ahead of time and talk to us? What are your desires for the upcoming budget? It should be a part of it. And so I think this illustrates why that would perhaps be a good idea. And then if we have a goal that staff can't support, that's okay. Or if staff supports it and the manager doesn't, that's okay, as long as we're transparent about it and it comes up in our list of supplementals not recommended. And, these, because basically you're looking at a council-initiated supplemental. And if it comes to us as a supplemental not recommended, then council members then we go to Game of Thrones, and council members can defend why they think that supplemental they requested is important to have. Because so much of the time we're looking at this budget like a zero-sum game, and we get a few hours perhaps to look things over. And again, I don't know that any of us felt like today was the day that we were supposed to come forward and say, I need this in this park, I need this on this street, I need this in a facility, and those kinds of things. I don't think that is in the long run the best way to handle it. So I think we could work on that process. And while I'm on the process side of it, I think that in the workshop where we begin our budget process, which is the 5-year forecast, that what we should do at the end of that is preview the upcoming workshop. The first several minutes of today's presentation and the PowerPoint, I think would have been helpful for us to have had, 6 weeks ago, so that when the book comes out and things like that, we've all had this refresher course in what is CIP, what are the different funding pots, and those kinds of things. So that then as we're reviewing this material, and we're explaining that we're going to see something new, blue boxes, things like that as we're reviewing this material, we know what the heck we're reviewing. So that's kind of a sidebar, but the main point is, for an example on the parks and stuff, we should have input sooner. Thank you.
Mr. Melner, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Okay, very good. Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of the council, so again, this CIP does reflect, it's really a combination of two items. It's looking at the previously adopted 10-year plan, taking off the year, obviously, that was completed. And so you don't see a lot of tremendous variation. And then it does include recommendations from the staff. So what you're seeing here are your staff's recommendation of where they believe, understanding the resources available, where we can spend that money. We don't need to make a decision today. I think what staff is doing is taking down notes from this conversation, which is why we have a follow-up CIP. And typically there, if the council has said, for example, and last year was, I think, happened exactly that way with the Westgate area fire station, that came up in the discussion of the first CIP budget workshop. And when we came back with recommendations, we came back and modified the CIP to reflect that. So when we say this is an opportunity to kind of weigh in, what we do is take and hear the comments made by the council members. We try to then look at how that could be incorporated into a plan. The CIP is in some ways so much more complex than our operating budget. Because it has constrained resources, and we have to look at the impact on what we do in one budget year may have an impact on other projects. It may push things out. So there's a certain amount of analysis that needs to be done. So our thought would be here is we're listening to everything that's being said. We hopefully can capture that, come back in our next CIP workshop, and we'll talk about the changes, show you what we thought we heard. There will be another opportunity for the council then to say, no, I think you missed the boat on this. This is not what we were saying this. We can schedule additional CIP workshops along the way. We made, when Vicki kind of rolled out the schedule, is that we always leave placeholders in the budget to say, if you're not ready to adopt a budget, let's put more meetings in place. So again, this is a reflection of staff recommendations, but they are just that, recommendations. We're going to hear what the input that all of you have, and then try to build that into a revised CIP that we can come back and discuss at our next scheduled CIP workshop.
Mayor? I just had a question. I'm a new council member, so I'm not familiar with all of this process, but Councilman Turner had mentioned about getting this presentation, this PowerPoint, sooner. Is this the normal process that we get it just before we get these books? Because I would have liked to have had it before too, so I could compare and kind of get an idea of what I'm looking at and understanding. Is that the way it's normally done? Is there a reason why we can't get it at the same time?
excuse me, Mayor, members of the council, we typically are able to get the books out, and we got the books out, the binders out a little bit earlier, but it does take us a little bit longer to get this presentation together. We certainly tried to get it out sooner, but this time we were not able to get it together until Friday. It's a very, let me see if it's a very complicated thing to actually get this into PowerPoint. It doesn't seem that bad, but as late as Friday, I was with Miss Lindsay trying to figure out how to PDF things and get them inserted in here. It's just sort of a little bit more complicated than it may seem, but we were able to get the books out, more than a week before, and that's, kind of our goal. And then we've, made some revisions to the change documents, sort of to Mr. Phelps's point. Every year we get some feedback from council, and we try to incorporate that not only into the CIP and potential changes there, but into the nature of the types of information you would like. And so this is the first year we use the colors to identify the bond projects, because that's something we heard from council last year, that they were not sure how to know which projects needed additional bond authority. And so every year we make modifications to what we're doing in order to address some of these questions. In addition to that, I think it's a good time to mention that we are, Budget and Finance is implementing a new budgeting software called Questica. That budgeting software we expect to be able to use on the next cycle. We're sort of running a parallel budget right now using that piece of software, and we expect to be able to do much better reporting and also have things for council much earlier. So for example, right now when you see these projects and even the individual descriptions, they don't tell you what council district it's in. But in the new software, that's a field that we'll be able to capture, and you'll be able to see, okay, this project is in, the Yucca district, for example. So every year we try to do it a little bit better. We know, it's not always exactly perfect, but it's continuous improvement, and that's what we're looking for here.
Okay, well, thank you.
Mayor. Mayor, council, staff. I wanted to advocate for ADA compliance at Rose Lane Park. I know that the previous council, thank you, I'm very gracious for all of the improvements that we've already had, but I would like to request consideration for the next 10 years that we have ADA compliant sidewalks that get over to the Ramadas, and also a second priority would be to update those Ramadas because there's only 4 of them and they're pretty old. And then a third priority would be to upgrade the athletic fields, basketball fields, pickleball fields, etc. So that is a request that I have that we consider. Thank you.
Mayor. I do, Mr. Kennedy, I hope you're still here. I have a council that has special interest on accessible and adaptive playgrounds, and I thought that was going to be part of the conversation with the CIP and where how the council wants to pursue those. Do we want to program, those around the city to make those? I know the Sierra Verde Park remodel is including some adaptive playground equipment, but I think our residents and with disabilities and the children in our city with disabilities, we should have playgrounds around the city that they're able to participate in. They're members of this community and they deserve that. But I don't know where we are with that or how we're programming that into this CIP.
Mayor and Vice Mayor, we do have the item scheduled to come back to you at a council workshop on March 25th to discuss the findings that we have done on both the ADA accessibility and adaptive and inclusive playground information. So we will be bringing that to you on March 25th.
So I guess the good news, bad news is, the good news is it's coming, and the bad news is we don't have any funding for it right now anyway. So, so will there still be an opportunity to have the discussion about how we want to plug those in around the city? I mean, I don't know what the plan's going to be. It's going to take all 7 of us to figure that out. But I know there was a consensus that we should afford children with disabilities the opportunity to be able to play at a playground and program around the city where they're able to get to one within a moderate distance of where they live. So we're still going to have an opportunity to plug that in because, like I said, the good news, bad news is we don't have the funding for it right now anyway. So it's going to be probably parks that are already programmed, and then to implement those changes into the parks that are already programmed for renovations. Is that how we're kind of thinking we're going to do it?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, so the item that we'll be bringing back at workshop really is broken into two areas. One is to improve accessibility to the playgrounds, mainly focusing on the playground surface, whether it's sand, engineered wood fiber, and or poured in place. So that'll be one aspect, and how we move forward in improving the accessibility. And then the other aspect is we will come to you with some recommendations for locations for more of an all-inclusive adaptive playground, specifically at areas throughout the city. So we'll be bringing both of those two options to you, but they would require additional funding as you've identified.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Mayor? We have a real gem in the Cactus District, which is the L.C. McCarthy Sensory Garden. So I would also like to talk with you further and with staff about how we can make improvements to that area. Thank you.
Mayor? I had a question on page 69. Where it talks about the Heroes Park Rec and Aquatic Center, and you have a carryover of $394,982. What is that money carried over for?
Mayor and council members, Councilmember Guzman, that is to begin the study for the Recreation and Aquatic Center. So we have recently engaged a firm to assist us with that process.
So it has started?
Yes, we've had an early kickoff meeting, and we're getting ready to, approve the scope and fee for the architect engineering firm, and then we'll be moving forward shortly on that process.
About how long do you think that'll take?
Generally, that process, we'll look to try to get some early wins with some early renderings and potential programming out of that here within the next, 3 to 4 months.
I also noticed that it's been the Aquatics and Recreation Center has been moved to fiscal year 31-35, and it's highlighted in blue. So apparently that means that we're going to need to go out and have a bond election in order to have money to finish that. Is that correct?
Mayor, members of the council, that's correct. That's one of the projects that we think would be best funded, in particular with general obligation bonds. It's typically the type of thing that you would fund because it's a very large project. And it has moved out in part because of financial circumstances. We had anticipated that we might have at least partial cash funding, but with some of the challenges in terms of revenues and also some of the changes in tax code and those types of things, we've had to rely more upon bonds than we thought we would have to. We thought we might have some cash, but it's not looking like we will. And so it got moved out slightly. Now, if the bond gets, passed, and we're not advocating, again, we have an issue here. We have to be careful not to advocate, but if the bond were to pass, then there's a possibility that we could move it forward. We also have to look at the operating cost of it. So that's part of it as well. We have to build a recreation aquatic center, and then we have to staff it with all of the staffing. So
right.
Once we know that we have a bond that's passed, then we'll start to work in the timing along with how we staff it and what that's going to cost.
So is this $42,500,000, is that going to be enough for it?
We won't, that's another question that we really won't have the answer to until we start doing more of a programming study, but that's our best estimate at this point in time.
And do you have an idea of what we're going to request on the bond?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood your question.
Well, how much are we going to go?
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet, okay. Forget it.
Mayor, if I could just point out, and I mean, I've supported all the improvements to Heroes Park. The early council, it was a different council, even before Councilmember Clark, moved to go ahead and start on the library, even though at the time I think we only had about $2 million to start the library. We really didn't have any money. In fact, the council member at that time wanted to purchase a book ATM, and the rest of the council was like, no, we're not doing that. We're going to have a building, even though it was going to be quite modest. That was all we could afford at the time. As time went on, we had more money available. We were able to build a very nice library for, but I just want to caution to be real careful about, because I think, you know, the bond money is going to need to be spread out around the city, you know, certainly not equally, but projects that are meaningful to all around the city. And I just wanted to, and I don't know if Councilmember Guzman knows this, but in the last 4 years, we've invested $33.5 million just in Heroes Park. It's gotten a big, big investment over the last 4 years. So that, I don't know whether that has anything to do with why that's been pushed out, but, you know, we've got 78 or 79 parks around the city. So I just wanted to make sure that she was aware of that I did. Since 2020 through 2024, we've invested $33.5 million in Heroes Parks with the lakes and the sports fields, which I supported all of that. I just caution us to be very careful that, you know, that these need to be, the money needs to be spread out around the city. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This slide shows the two new parks projects that I'm proposing. We've got park signage improvements and Dos Lagos park improvements, and that totals about almost 1.4 million. Any additional questions for parks before we move on to parking lots? Okay, next up we have parking lots. Parking lots is 100% funded by general funds. Parking lots is focused on annual funding for existing parking lots and garage repairs. And this shows the parks, it's completely funded, or parking lots is completely funded by general fund, and the total 10-year CIP is 21.7 million. And then these are the two projects listed under parking lots. Any questions on any of these specific
Mayor,
projects?
I have a question. So parking lots, for example, let's say Saguaro Ranch Park. I know for a fact that the parking lots in Saguaro Ranch Park are in terrible condition. Would that be part of the master plan, or would that fall under city parking lots? Where are those projects carried?
Mayor and Council, I think Michelle Watinko can answer that question.
Okay.
Mayor, council members, Vice Mayor Tomilchoff, specifically next year, FY26, in the parking lot project, we actually do have Saguaro Ranch Park programmed in there, as well as Bonzo North and South Parks, Chaparral Park, Thunderbird Paseo Park, and then the airport long-term parking lots. And just a reminder, with those, all the ADA accessibility requirements with parking lots goes into those projects as well. So Saguaro Ranch Park is programmed in this parking lot project.
Mayor, members of the council, if I may also, it does, in answer to your general question, it varies for example, in the Thunderbird Conservation Park, because we're redoing ingress and egress, all those parking lots are part of that master plan for the trailheads and that type of thing. So parking lots can vary slightly, just depends on what we're doing at the park, but in particular for Thunderbird Conservation, they are actually part of that master plan.
Very good. I'm glad to see some of the parking lots are getting addressed, and that the money's not going to come out of the money program for the parks master plan. Thank you.
From my understanding and also for the public's understanding, can someone please answer or explain to me how or which fund the VI garage space use agreement is coming out of, the $14 million? And also, when has it been paid, or has it already been paid?
Mayor, members of the council, the VI garage space is general fund. It's already been transferred, however, out of the general fund into what we call our 1080 fund. That was one of the first funds Jonathan talked about. So the actual money has been transferred into the city's general government capital or general fund capital account. And it will not be paid, I believe, until there's a certificate of occupancy and the construction on the parking lot is completed.
Thank you.
Mayor, how is a parking use space agreement a capital project? Why it's being carried, I mean, I know why the money was in the CIP to begin with, because there was a agreement, a joint agreement to construct the parking lot, which was actually a project, but I'm just curious, is it being carried here just because that's where the money is?
Mayor, members of the council, it has changed over time. You'll recall that in the beginning, it was more of a concept to build the parking garage, and there were some other things involved. And yes, we've left it there. I think that it's a little bit more transparent, since it's a large dollar amount, to keep it in the CIP so we can keep track of it that way.
Okay, it just seems strange that it's part of the CIP.
Mr. Gibson is reminding me that under GASB, it's also a capital lease, and so it's appropriately considered as capital.
Mayor. And so, as part of the parking space agreement, if you could please remind me, are we responsible for the maintenance of that, or is the Via Resort responsible for the maintenance of that?
Mayor, members of the council, my understanding is Via Resort is responsible for the maintenance of that. That's their facility that they are building. We are simply leasing some of the space.
Mayor, and you said that once the certificate of occupancy is given, that's when the remainder of the payment will be the remainder of the payment will be given.
Mayor, members of the council, that's when this payment will be made. There has been no payment to date, so it's not a remainder necessarily. But yes, that's when this payment will be made. Then there are two additional payments that could be made if the lease is renewed later, each for 1.5 million, but those don't come until 10 years and then 35 and 45 years out.
Mayor, and so if the certificate of occupancy is when we can actually use the 800 spaces, does that mean that the lease is being pushed back, since it's a 25-year lease, that the lease would start on that date, or is the lease already started from when the council approved it?
Now, Mayor, members of the council, it will start when the payment is made and the spaces are available. And then actually under accounting again, it'll get costed out over multiple years. So the cash will go out in 1 year, but under accounting, it'll get depreciated or expensed over multiple years.
Mayor, council, under GASB 87, it's a right to use asset. And so as Ms. Rios mentioned, we'll be accounting for it on an annual basis. Accounting standards have changed over the years. It used to be called a capital lease, but that is no longer the case under GASB 87. And so we book the asset at the start of the cycle, and then we recognize an expense over the life of the lease.
And Mayor, one last question is for Mr. Bailey. Mr. Bailey, in terms of this agreement, can you remind me and the public how this is not a gift?
Mayor and council, I guess there's a couple of questions. First and foremost, you're asking for legal advice in an open forum. And before I would provide legal advice in an open forum, I would generally want to advise the council as a whole as to what that legal advice is. Specifically related to what the gift clause means generally is that there is adequate consideration that's provided for in this agreement, and in light of the ability of the city to lease the spaces that we will have control over for events, also a right that's associated with this lease where the remaining vacant parcels of property will have a right to use those parking spaces. And again, the city, which is unique, it's the city can monetize those. We believe that's sufficient consideration.
Thank you. I'm done.
Any additional questions before we move to libraries?
Everybody's favorite subject.
Okay, libraries funded mostly by GEO bonds at 80%, and then we have 4% for DIF and 3% at grants. Libraries focus on improving existing facilities by following industry standard replacement cycles and replacing existing assets as needed. This slide shows the different funding sources totals for the library projects. As you can see, 4,100 is our library bond, and starting fiscal year 28, we'll need voter authorization. There are no new projects that library is proposing this fiscal year. And this slide shows the 6 individual library projects. Does anybody have any questions regarding any of these individual projects? No questions, we'll move to, oh,
Wait,
sorry.
Yeah.
Put your
This is on.
microphone
There
in
you go.
front of you a little bit better.
Closer?
Yeah.
Okay,
You talk very soft, so it's hard to hear.
okay. I have a question on the Yucca Study Space and Heroes Park Library expansion. Are they the same thing? I mean, it's, can you explain those two? What is the Yucca District Meeting Space? That's the study that was done to expand the park?
Hi, council member and mayor. The study, the Yucca District Meeting Space Study, was the original study, and then the Heroes Park Library expansion is the culmination from that study.
Okay.
And so they are combined at this point.
Okay, so the 2 million that's left, that's carried over, is for that expansion?
Yes.
Correct? Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll discuss landfill. Landfill is 100% funded by enterprise user fee revenues. Landfill is focused on programmed vehicle replacements, which follows industry standard replacement cycles. Landfill also has a North Cell landfill project, which includes a North Cell phase construction, the landfill gas extraction system, and stormwater controls. This slide shows only source of for the funding source of landfill, which is the enterprise fund. These next 2 slides show the individual projects for landfill. The total CIP equals $44 million for the year. Any questions on any individual project? And landfill is not requesting any new projects for this CIP. Next, we have facility maintenance. Facility maintenance program is funded 61% through general fund, 15% through enterprise fund, which is in this case for water and solid waste, 12% general obligation, 11% special revenue, and 1% with grants. Facility maintenance programs focus on improving existing assets through programmatic replacement, and they also follow industry standard replacement cycles. Replace existing assets as needed, and the downtown campus reinvestment project is included in this program.
Mayor? Can we please, she doesn't need to come up here, but could we please get a list of the items requested and the items approved for Camelback Ranch Maintenance Reserve? Just emailed. Thank you.
Mayor? Unless that's included in the government facilities line there where the blue boxes are, could we have some information about what's in the blue boxes? What projects those cover?
Yes, I'll go through those slides. So here's one of those slides, the Glendale campus, Glendale Ops campus for field staff building. Would you like some specific questions on this project?
That one's pretty explanatory, but if we flip back a page, those 4 boxes there where it just says government facilities.
Mayor, members of the council, this is a total sheet that's telling you by funding source. So then on the subsequent sheets, wherever it's blue, it tells you what the project is. So the total of the projects will total what this funding, what this government facilities is. So in government facilities, we have $11.6 million. Jonathan, can you go one further? So these projects here, where it's listing the individual projects, those blue boxes will tell you what the individual projects are that are in that, the other blue boxes on the other slide. Does that make, am I making sense?
It kind, excuse me, it kind of does. But if I look under fiscal year 27, government facilities, 3.1 million. But the blue box on the next page is 10 million.
That's,
I mean, it's not crucial at the moment. You can explain it to me offline so that I don't further embarrass myself. But I'm curious as to how does that, what are we working on there? Where's that money going? Because government facilities is a big umbrella. You know,
Yes, we can get you that information.
thank you.
Mayor? We talked about the ops campus. This is several years ago that we you know, went through the whole thing and thought we were moving forward and thought we had the authority. Was some of that authority that was initially for the ops campus reallocated to City Hall and other projects?
Vice Mayor Tomilchev, yes, some of that authority was reallocated for City Hall.
Would have been nice for us to know that when it was happening. Thank you.
Interesting. Good catch.
Any other questions? Anybody else? No? Okay, you can please move ahead.
Thank you. Next, we have drainage. Drainage program is funded 49% through flood control, general obligation bonds. 46% comes from grants, and 5% is for general fund. The drainage program focuses on designing and constructing flood control drainage improvements. They work in coordination with internal and external partners, including Maricopa County Flood District, commonly referred to as MCFLOOD, and they also with arterial reconstruction program with transportation. Drainage isn't requesting any new projects for this 10-year CIP, and the total is $56.3 million. This slide shows the 6 projects in the drainage program. Do we have any questions on any of these individual projects?
I don't see any, Jonathan.
Thank you. Move to airport. Airport is 85% funded by grants and 15% by transportation sales tax. Some of the projects include the airport master plan study, South Apron reconstruction, airfield lighting and signage, and the self-fuel station site survey. Here's the total by funding source. As you can see, most of it's by airport grant. And then airport is requesting 3 new projects for this 10-year CIP. The total CIP is $54 million. Any questions on airport projects?
I don't see any.
And the last project we'll review today is ARTS. ARTS Capital Improvement Program is funded 100% by the ARTS Fund. The ARTS Fund is funded through 1% of construction completed in the current fiscal year and all the CIP eligible projects. Projects include the Municipal Arts Program in the Arts Master Plan. As we go through, the Arts Master Plan shows estimated carry over $100,000, but I think that deal was just finalized, so that won't be carried over till the following fiscal year.
Thank you. I think this is the point in the program where I every year inject the reminder, and correct me if I'm wrong, that years ago during our financial crisis, $2 million was reallocated out of the arts fund, I think to the general fund to keep us afloat. And I'd just like to remind everybody of that. I would like to have the money returned so that our Arts Commission understands what they have to work with, and we can get back to dreaming large for the culture side of our community, which is every bit as important as all of our capital projects and everything else. So, thank you.
Mayor, I've supported this every year. I think, you know, this money was essentially borrowed from the Arts Fund. We could have paid it back the last several years where the financial picture was a lot better than it is now.
Yep.
But that's the problem with waiting is, but it's, I mean, the money is still owed, even if we set up a payment plan like we have for the enterprise funds that were, money was transferred out of to wire to the NHL. We've got a payment plan. We've got a plan to pay that back. So whether or not we feel like we could, you know, take the $2 million this year and put it back in the arts fund, I still feel like we should, if we're not going to do that, we should at least have a plan, whether it's $500,000 a year, whatever it is, to pay the money back. We have an obligation to return that money back to the arts fund. Thank you.
So I think that I appreciate the support, and I think that it's at our wrap-up meeting that maybe we can take care of that piece of business. And if any members have questions about it, they can contact me within the bounds of the open meeting law.
All right. What
Mayor,
else?
members of the council, I think that concludes our presentation. Jonathan, do you want to skip to the budget calendar? Again, our next scheduled meeting is April 1st, which is April Fool's Day, but we'll try not to have any jokes for you. And it's also my daughter's birthday, so we will have jokes for her. If there aren't any other questions, we, you know, we're complete for now. So we appreciate all the discussion, and just let us know if you have any other questions.
Okay. There being no further business before this council, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.